Ghorman pride is a term you'll often hear, and it will only take you a few hours on the ground to understand the source of that term.
Ghorman is of great interest to the Empire.
So, even though that up to this point in the show, we have been shown many examples of the Empire's evil on both large and small scales, and also the cold reality of what it means to actually be a revolutionary, this is where they really drive it all home and completely remove the veil of what a conflict like this actually means. It all centers around the planet Ghorman, a place that we are told is a hub for art and culture. They have a major export in their silk industry. It's a famous center for fashion, it's fairly wealthy, it has representation in the Senate. Bottom line, it's not some backwater outer rim planet like Ferrix. This is a legit major planet in the Empire that is not unnoticed by the general population.
The perfect setting for buyers and designers from around the galaxy to tour the showrooms and brokerages of this peaceful and elegant metropolis.
But, unlucky for the Ghor, their planet just so happens to be rich with a resource that the Empire requires for their new energy project, aka the building of the first Death Star. And, even unluckier for them, the extraction of said resource from the planet would likely result in the destabilization of the planet itself, and therefore the total extinction of the Ghor people and their home. Now, for even a somewhat morally upright government, that unfortunate reality would almost certainly nix any plans for extraction for reasons that I obviously don't need to explain, but for the Empire, well, that is just another Tuesday, and how they go about getting what they want leads into this really great, if not horrifying, exploration of the true evil of the Empire and fascism. It is genuinely haunting. So the order comes down from up top that this resource has to be extracted, and where does it land but with our friends over at the ISB? So what do? How exactly do they plan on getting what they want without causing too much of a stir in the Empire? Do they just bulldoze their way in and say to hell with the blowback? Do they pull some shenanigans in the Senate and legitimize the extraction that way? No. While those might be faster and more direct options, they would have a much harder time selling to the public that what they were doing was in any way justified. It's one thing to use that kind of force on a planet like Ferrix that no one really cares about or is even that aware of, but rolling tanks into a major planet like Ghorman is going to need some massaging of the public if they hope to pull it off with minimum bad PR. So the ISB, under the direction of Dedra Meero, who is on the rebound now after failing to catch Luthen and Cassian back in Season 1, begins a years-long scheme of slowly increasing Imperial presence on the planet under the guise of supposed rising crime rates and outside rebel activity and any other bullshit they need to spin in the hopes that their increased presence will drum up enough dissatisfaction with the Empire on Ghorman that the Ghor people will start to resist them and fight back, which will then allow the Empire to keep pushing further and further as the Ghorman resistance gets bolder and angrier, which will put the planet into this back and forth escalation of violence until the Empire finally has a green light to just seize direct military control of Ghorman altogether. All the while, the state-run media is feeding the rest of the Empire the story of danger on Ghorman and violent anti-imperial terrorists that threaten the safety of everyone. It's a horrifyingly evil scheme, but it's genius and also realistic to how fascist governments go about empire building in real life. It's not just about power and force and military might. It's a top-to-bottom systematic brainwashing of the nation to a point where they believe that everything done for the Empire, no matter how evil, is in some way justifiable. They have to constantly feed a new enemy to the people for this to sustain itself. I mean, that's how the Empire got its start in the first place, by singling out a small minority of supposed traitors to the nation. But eventually, once you run out of foreign enemies, the snake will begin to eat its own tail, and suddenly, a planet like Ghorman is the new boogeyman of the Empire. It's this never-ending cycle.
They won't get another credit of mine. I'm not buying Ghorman again. I'm sick of it. They were always too good for the rest of us.
You are watching too much Imperial news.
And like I mentioned earlier, the haunting part of all of this is that it's not being conceived by these mustache-twirling villains like the Emperor while he sits on his throne and laughs about how evil he is. It's all done in a corporate boardroom-like setting by middle managers complete with bored faces and PowerPoint presentations, as if it was just another day at the office. They talk about planet-wide genocide the same way they would the quarterly earnings. It kind of reminded me of like the Zone of Interest in that way, which I cannot believe I am referencing unironically in a video about a Disney Plus Star Wars show, but here we are. This show has got some serious, gigantic balls, and it is not afraid to show them. What really takes this plotline to the next level, though, is how they show this from the Rebel perspective, because Luthen is very much aware that all of this is happening, not the specific plans for resource extraction, but he knows the Empire has got some kind of scheme going on Ghorman. So he sends Cassian to make contact with the local resistance and evaluate what's going on there. And what's really interesting about all of this is that the resistance Cassian meets is completely unlike him and the rest of Luthen's fighters. They're actually much closer to the rebels we are used to seeing in the mainline movies. People who have a very romantic view of the fight and don't play by the same rules as the Empire. Their plans are not to dismantle the Empire at all costs like Luthen, but simply to get their message out to the universe that what is happening on Ghorman is wrong. They still hold true to the idea that the system can save them. Hell, their leader doesn't even believe Palpatine is in on it. He thinks it's some kind of rogue ISB shadow government plot. In other words, they really have no clue as to what they're up against, and that's exactly what Cassian tells Luthen. These people are not rebels and they have no idea what they're doing. However, unlike Cassian, Luthen actually believes this is all a good thing. Similar to the ISB, he sees Ghorman as an opportunity, a way to stoke the fire of the rebellion. Sacrifice the planet in the hopes that it burns bright enough to tip the scales in his favor.
If it goes up in flames, it will burn very brightly.
So in this kind of twisted way, he's actually aligned with the ISB on this front, and it makes sense because that's who this guy is. Like he says in his monologue back in season 1, he's forced to employ the same tools as his enemy to fight them. He is willing to sacrifice anything and anyone, even up to a whole planet, if it will benefit the cause.
Think about a planet like Ghorman in rebellion. A planet of wealth and status.
It's ruthless and calculating and completely immoral, but it's all for the rebellion, so none of the rest of it matters. And most interesting of all, he's not proven wrong. He's actually validated for letting Ghorman burn, because that was the tipping point for the Alliance to start gaining real power. Doesn't mean what he did was right, but it did work.
It's everywhere now. There's a whole galaxy out there waiting to disgust you.
That juxtaposition, though, of the older rebels like Luthen and the resistance fighters on Ghorman also shows that as we get closer to Rogue One and the OT, people like Luthen are becoming outdated in a sense. It's undeniable that the rebellion needed people like him to do the dirty, thankless work in the beginning, but as the Alliance gets more organized, what it needs more now is heroes, people like Mon Mothma or Cassian, or eventually Luke and Han and Leia, people who can lead and inspire in the open and not work in the shadows and cut their allies to keep the cause going. Ghorman is the ultimate shifting point in the show, the place where the rebellion as we eventually know it is born, and where the old guard starts to fade into obscurity. In some cases, quite literally. Cinta is killed, Vel and Cassian become disillusioned with Luthen and join Yavin, the ISB begins to collapse despite their success, and poor Cyril Karn gets his entire world stripped down right in front of him. After living his dream life for a time as an agent in the ISB, working on Ghorman to get intel on the Resistance, and all of it with Dedra, he eventually realizes the nature of the work he's been doing. Not snuffing out pockets of outside agitators and bringing peace to the planet while eating his beloved cereal, but actually helping to prime the planet for genocide. Both him and the Ghorman Resistance, being the most romantic, idealistic parties on the show, have no idea the extent to which the Empire Empire will go to get what they want and are totally unprepared for when it comes. It's just not how people like him think, so realizing what he's done finally causes a major change in him. He leaves Dedra and walks out into the chaos of the Ghorman massacre as a totally broken person. And the real cherry on top of all of it is, in the chaos, who does he see but his long-lost Gary Oak-ass rival, Cassian motherfucking Andor. A guy who he blames for everything that has gone wrong in his life has now magically appeared right in front of him at his lowest point, and the man just snaps, leading to one of the most violent fights in the history of Star Wars. Being a franchise that features the lightsaber, it understandably is a series that rarely has hand-to-hand combat, so seeing these two dudes duke it out in this awkward, simple fistfight is pretty cool, and the way it ends too just rips your heart out. After a long and messy fight, Cyril finally gets the upper hand and is about to kill Cassian, and Cassian drops the most earth-shattering line he possibly could have in that moment.
Who are you?
The guy who you have thought about probably every day for years now and who you blame for every bad thing that has happened to you doesn't even know who the fuck you are. After everything this guy has gone through, he finally realizes just how insignificant he really is, and then he fucking dies. I mean, it's just the most tragic thing in an arc that's all about tragedy. You see everyone we have come to know and love either meet their end or reach their breaking point on Ghorman. It's the defining arc of the series. It's the ultimate display of pain and tragedy and loss and oppression and revolution and just everything the show is about. It's exactly where this show needed to go, and craziest of all, it's not even the end. Now, one of the things I've mentioned a lot throughout this video is that the show has a very large emphasis on consequences. No one outside of people like Mon Mothma or Cassian, who have to appear in Rogue One and beyond, has anything even remotely close to plot armor. And even Cassian only has plot armor because he already has to die somewhere else. It isn't like he gets off easy. In fact, he somehow gets off worse, if that's possible. But everyone else in this show lives and dies exactly how their characters operate. It's brutally realistic because virtually every major character we follow lives an extremely dangerous lifestyle, and they all pay the price for it. Rebels like the crew on Aldhani, save for 2, all get killed unceremoniously in action or even via totally random accidents that just happen in their line of work. Characters in the orbit of people like Mon Mothma or Cassian or Luthen often get picked off just for knowing too much or choosing to tie themselves to these people. People that live double lives and work undercover don't live long. People who work in the ISB and fail to deliver face serious consequences. The vast majority of the prisoners in Narkina 5 are presumed dead. No matter how competent or how skilled or how seemingly important to the plot a person in this show is, it does not protect them for what they have coming. Doesn't mean everyone dies, but most of them do, which makes sense considering the choices they have all made. Again, revolution is not for the sane. These people are all marked for death at some point. It's just a matter of time, which is what makes many of them heroes, even if they aren't all great people, because they're making the ultimate sacrifice. It also just works great from a storytelling perspective, especially in a franchise like this. One of the many issues with Star Wars as a franchise, especially nowadays, is that the playground they're always playing in is this stretch of like 40 to 50-ish years where the majority of the main saga takes place in, and it almost always concerns the same crop of characters, which is fine for the mainline movies because they pave the lore as they go and have that freedom, but for spin-off shows like, say, I don't know, just picking one randomly, the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, for example, simply making a spin-off show with a character like him inhibits the storytelling potential in a way that is almost impossible to get around, because this is a guy that we have followed very closely from the time he's a young man in his 20s all the way to his death. We know his friends, his rivals, his mentors, his old flame, where he lives at a given moment, what he does at a given moment. We know how and when he dies. We know who kills him. We even know what he does as a spirit in the afterlife. None of that is obviously a problem in a vacuum, because that is just storytelling. We've gone through Obi-Wan's life in most of the mainline movies, in the Clone Wars, in all of these things, and we know him quite well. He is a fully fleshed out, well-rounded character, but he's also a complete character. So knowing all of that, A, makes it very difficult to conceive a story of relevance to actually depict in a show, and B, makes any added content with him devoid of any and all tension, since we know his fate and the fate of literally everyone in his orbit. Like, gee, I wonder if Luke or Leia is gonna be in real danger from the Inquisitors. Who's to say? Do you think he or Vader will die in this fight? Guess you're gonna have to watch to find out. Granted, Obi-Wan is probably one of the most extreme examples of this issue, but this is a thing that is present in virtually all recent Star Wars media in some way, and it robs it of so much of its tension and intrigue. When you can't play with new toys, the old ones are not going to remain fun forever. So for Andor to take full advantage of that by not having more legacy characters than needed and actually having the balls to kill off a ton of its own characters makes it genuinely interesting and stressful to watch. It is conceivable that any of these people can die at any point or not. They could all just fall in with the rebellion and never be heard from again. It could go either way, but the point is you don't actually know. So when this final arc starts to unfold, it constantly has you on the edge of your seat. People are getting picked off left and right, characters are ending up in places you didn't expect, and the looming shadow of Rogue One is right around the corner. It's like watching a genuine thriller. You don't know how it's going to end for virtually any of these people. Even someone like Mon Mothma, who we know is not going to die, goes through this intense sequence where she publicly denounces the Emperor in front of the Senate and essentially signs her own death warrant and then has to be extracted by Cassian. You don't fear for her death because we know she isn't going to die, but she still has a family and you don't know how she gets from point A to point B. Point is, it's actual unknown territory.
I have friends everywhere.
But the real thriller though, and what makes this last arc so special, is seeing how it all ends for Luthen and Kleya. Luthen is a guy that has been marked for death since day one. He's simply too bold and too radical and far too important to make it to Rogue One without getting what's coming to him. Plus, part of the greater narrative has always been about the rebellion growing beyond him, so you always knew it was not going to end well. What you didn't expect, however, is Kleya, a character that didn't really do all that much in season 1, but straight up steals the show here and ends up being one of the very best characters in the entire series. You see Luthen meet with his longtime ISB contact Lonnie, who gives Luthen information about the Death Star, and after Luthen commits one last ice-cold murder for the sake of the rebellion, the story becomes this race for Luthen to get this information back to the rebels on Yavin before he is caught, which he is shortly after in this great scene with Dedra where he tries to kill himself to protect what he knows, leaving him alive but unresponsive and in critical condition. And for the next 2 episodes, the story shifts to Kleya as our POV character as she takes on the burden of getting this information back to Yavin and of course finishing off Luthen before he wakes up. Now up to this point in the season we've already had some pretty great moments with her, like the sequence where she has to remove this bug that her and Luthen have planted in this gallery, and also this great exchange with Vel, but aside from a few moments like those, she's not a character that we know much about. She's pretty much just Luthen's assistant for most of the show, but out of nowhere in this last act, she gets full-on main character duties. We get to see her and Luthen's backstory where he's an officer in the Empire that's massacring her home planet, and he saves her and leaves his post. You see him training her, they witness more of the Empire's crimes together, they assassinate Jar Jar Binks on Naboo with a car bomb, which I know he did give way to the Empire and all, but still seems a bit harsh, and all the while you're cutting back and forth to this tense spy sequence in the hospital where she sneaks in and finishes off Luthen. She even meets the chocolate lady from SpongeBob along the way.
Sweet, sweet chocolate. I always hated it.
Meanwhile, the ISB is desperately trying to contain the Death Star leak at any and all cost and is essentially imploding. Dedra, due to her constant overreaches, gets blamed for the leak for having unreported files on the Death Star, so she is taken off the board. Krennic is flailing and has no idea what to do. The capture of Kleya is left to this younger ISB supervisor, and even the head of the ISB, Partagas, is doomed for failing to contain the leak. The chickens are all coming home to roost. Yet again, everyone is met with the consequences for how reckless they have been operating. So Cassian and his newly reprogrammed K2SO have to return to Coruscant one last time to rescue Kleya and make sure the Death Star information gets back to the Rebel command. And even after all the sacrifice and years of his life Luthen gave to the cause, because of how much of a cunning, cold, paranoid person he was, the Rebels don't even believe his intel.
Paranoia, his secrecy, his inability to collaborate, the web of doubts that he created. It makes everything unbelievable.
They've moved beyond him to a point where they don't even appreciate what he did. Literally everything from his monologue back in season 1 came true. He will not be remembered and he will not be rewarded. His overall legacy lives on, but people like him or Cassian and all the others that have been in the fight since the beginning will never be remembered or rewarded or even live to see their work pay off. It is the cold, harsh reality of Revolution. It's the grand arc of the show. Despite going out like one, Luthen did not die a hero's death. I mean, there's just so much to cover in this show. I haven't even gotten to Bix or the fact that she's forced to leave Cassian so he can help stay and fight for the rebellion without wanting to leave it all behind for her. I mean, talk about pouring salt on the wound of his death in Rogue One. They even give him a kid he left behind. It's fucking crazy. But it's all very true to how this show has worked from the very beginning. It's not a story designed to produce a happy ending, and yet the ending is not dark or cynical. It's actually pretty hopeful in a strange way, just not for those lost along the way, and that is the real tragedy of Andor. So after everything that went on in the show, it all eventually comes back to Rogue One. All the characters are either taken off the board entirely or put into a position to be ready for the plot of Rogue One to happen. Now, this obviously makes sense, considering that Andor is, a prequel to that movie and all, but in the way it plays out, I think retroactively morphing Rogue One into the de facto finale of Andor kind of undermines the show in a lot of ways. I mean, not entirely, certainly for a character like Cassian, who's of course the show's namesake, it makes sense to leave him off right before the plot of that movie. It does work in that way, but the issue is, and maybe this is just my Rogue One distaste coming out, watching Rogue One directly after Andor, like I did, from the point of view of it being Andor's finale, left at least me feeling pretty deflated because it's just not as good. It's not even that though. There is a quality drop off, of course, but the real issue is that it just doesn't work from that perspective, because even though the show leads right up to it and builds its story around it and takes place like a day after it, it really has nothing to do with the show, which I know sounds weird, but it's true. The show is of course mainly about Cassian Andor, but it goes beyond just him. It's really more of an ensemble show, especially as it gets towards the end. It's about all these different perspectives within the Empire, the Rebellion, small fish, big fish, important people, totally random people. It's just about what life is like at this moment in the saga and how the Empire's oppression affects everyone we follow. Cassian may be the linchpin of it all, but the show is so much more than him. I mean, that's what that last scene of him walking into Rogue One is showing us, all the people this conflict has impacted and how it led them all to this moment. But then you jump into Rogue One and it's just a totally different thing. It's not about these people or the cause or even Cassian really. It's about Jyn Erso and to a lesser degree Krennic, but that's it. And that's totally fine, to be clear. That's not at all a knock on the movie. I mean, it wasn't made to be the finale to anything aside from its own self-contained narrative, but in the way it exists now, it's kind of weird and distracting to watch the ending of Andor with Cassian walking into Rogue One and then turning on Rogue One and seeing Cassian being essentially this totally secondary character all of a sudden that is not given a whole lot to do. But it's only because of how close those 2 points line up. Like, weirdly, honestly, and I know this sounds crazy, but I think the ending of season 1 almost leads into Rogue One better for Cassian, because you see him complete his own totally self-contained arc of becoming a rebel, and the rest of it you can just kind of fill in your head. That was his own journey a few years before Rogue One, and the next time we see him, he can just be a side character, no problem. But the way season 2 leaves him and shows the sacrifice he makes with Bix and the Force Lady vision and all of that, it makes his appearance in Rogue One very underwhelming and strange, because he's very much set up to be the main character in the next act of his story. And again, that's just not who he is in Rogue One.
Your father would have been proud of you, Jin.
So, having now watched this show along with Rogue One a couple of different ways, I think it weirdly enough works a lot better if you watch Rogue One first and then just leave it at the end of season 2 of the show. The emotional beats just hit harder when you do it that way. Already knowing Cassian's eventual fate, knowing the weight of what Luthen and Clea are dealing with in the finale of the show, seeing the evolution of characters like Mon Mothma, Krennic is a lot more fun to watch in the show, knowing where he ends up. Low-key kind of steals the whole thing in season 2.
Access to stable, unlimited power will transform the galactic economy and solidify Imperial authority.
The cameos from Saw are much more fun to watch if you already know how much of a nut he is, and seeing Bix with Cassian's kid at the end, of course, only works if you've seen Rogue One. Like, I know no one who's watching this show hasn't seen Rogue One, so it's not an issue, but still, if you somehow have watched Andor and have not seen Rogue One and don't know that Cassian fucking blows up at the end of it, the ending of the show, when you see Bix and Cassian's kid, means diddly dick, because it's just a future he can go off to. You don't even understand how tragic it is. It is so clearly meant to be viewed after the movie. Like, that shot is the ultimate cap on everything the show and the movie was about. The price of revolution. The whole thing just works a lot better as a sequel series, despite it, being a prequel series. It's weird, I know, but it just is. It is a far better starting point for all this stuff than it is a finale to Andor in any way. And that's really my only major issue with the show. I love how it ends for a lot of the characters individually, like Dedra or Cyril or Luthen, but I think leaning on Rogue One as the quote-unquote true finale to the greater Andor narrative is a mistake, even if it was pretty much unavoidable. Then again, something like Clone Wars Season 7 actually does a very good job navigating this same issue. Instead of wrapping everything up right before Revenge of the Sith starts, they just choose to weave the end of that season into the movie itself, but from a different point of view, which allows them to end on whatever terms they want. Granted, you do have much more freedom with characters like Maul, Ahsoka, and Rex than you do with Cassian, who of course has to get blowed up in a few days, but still, there are ways around this issue. I would have loved to see the show maybe carry on an episode or two into Rogue One time with people like Clea, or Mon, or Vel, or Wilman, or whoever, and just see what's going on with all of them while Cassian is of course locked into his movie fate. Maybe they have to assist Princess Leia in the days leading up to A New Hope, or maybe a few of them unluckily end up on Alderaan, or whatever. Point is, you got options, and I think that would have been a really nice way to end things, especially with how much we grow attached to these other characters. It feels weird to end all their stories short just because Cassian is ending his. It's all just a bit clunky in my opinion, and feels very abrupt for a show that up to this point was totally independent and crafted the narrative it wanted to with no self-imposed restrictions. Doesn't change how I feel about the overall scope of the show. I mean, it's still very effective, but it is a bit of a letdown. Now, before I wrap things up, there is one more aspect of this show that I want to cover, and that is its place in the franchise itself, because like everything that comes out in this godforsaken franchise, there is of course lots of online discourse about it. I'm not going to get into any specific calling out of any individuals or anything like that. That isn't really my thing, but I do want to talk about how a show like this fits into the greater Star Wars universe, because it does seem like there is this divide among people like me me who think this show is the best thing ever and the peak of the franchise, and people who think this show is boring or quote-unquote not Star Wars.
I know you want to talk about the politics of it all. I do. I want to talk parties. Political parties?
I mean, look, if you watch this show and it doesn't do it for you for whatever reason or no reason at all, that is a-okay. No one is required to like all the things, and we could all do better with accepting that fact. But what does bother me about some of the pushback I've seen this show get online is the outright rejection of this show as even like a legitimate Star Wars work at all, because it seems to me that the kinds of people who are saying things in the realm of Andor is not Star Wars or Andor is boring are people who, to put it bluntly, are just not used to watching adult-oriented media. I know that sounds extremely pretentious, and it is, I'll own it, but this is a franchise here that, let's be honest, is aimed primarily at children. There's a reason why us kids who were raised with the Star Wars prequels are far more forgiving of them than people who were adults back when they came out, and the same thing goes with the sequels, because their primary demo is people who are like 10 years old, or I guess 10 years old at heart. Doesn't mean all ages can enjoy them, I mean clearly they can, but the vast majority of Star Wars media is not particularly deep or thoughtful or heavy or thought-provoking or capable of winning awards, and certainly none of it up until Andor came out was meant to be watched the same way you would a prestige television show on like HBO. And that's fine, because kids' entertainment doesn't need to be all that. It can be, but that's not always the goal. What I find really annoying though is that in an age where so much of this franchise is a cheap, nostalgia-driven, toothless, uninspired mess that everyone complains has no original ideas, is when something that isn't all those things finally comes around in the Disney era, it still can't win some people over simply because it isn't about space wizards waving around their swords. They cannot put their old toys away, and it puts this franchise in such a narrow box where, despite how large it is, it really can't veer off the familiar for some audiences. Like, there is a reason why Disney is hesitant to leave the Skywalker saga. A large contingent of the fan base only responds to seeing familiar characters from that era on screen, in part because that's all they've been fed for the last like 10 years. This is not a demo of people that are used to grappling with serious television and original ideas. Hate to say it, but it just is what it is. It's what this franchise has trained its fan base to be. And it's a major part of the reason why I say this franchise doesn't deserve this show. It's a franchise that exists for the sole purpose of shameless, empty corporate milking aimed at people who cannot be pleased in any circumstance outside of the most cheap nostalgia jerk-off moments you will ever see put to screen. So because of all that, many of its own fans will just reject anything like Andor outright, and people who aren't fans of the franchise will just assume it's more of the same empty corporate slop Disney has been producing for years now. It's never going to reach the audience it should because of the weird position it's in. It's the issue of making adult media in a non-adult franchise. It's like oil and water.
The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil.
I see Ben Quadraneros from the Twin System.
The show itself obviously works in a vacuum, but it honestly might be better off without the anchor of the Star Wars IP dragging it down. It's not a franchise that's built to sustain media like this. Hell, even someone like me who loves this show was still taken aback numerous times throughout because I just couldn't believe that X thing happened in a Star Wars show. My brain was not trained to expect mature content from it. So for someone that doesn't watch adult media in any context, I kind of get why it might be strange to watch a thing like Andor where the entertaining parts are the scenes of people talking and there's no lightsaber in sight. No matter how good the show is, it might just not be in the right franchise. There is certainly an argument to be made that it is not a series that can sustain adult-oriented content.
Tell your precious princess there will be no terms, there will be no surrender.
Hi, I'm holding for General Huggs.
And yet, The counter to all of that is that this show has reached a large audience and people do love it, Star Wars fans or otherwise. It's not going to appeal to people that want a show about 800 Mandalorians fighting 800 Jedi, but almost nothing will please people like that. But most Star Wars fans do actually like stuff like Andor, and if they were simply served more consistent quality content like it, it wouldn't feel as different as it does. We've all just been poisoned by years of oversaturation from this franchise that it's hard for us to analyze any of this shit without our brains just shorting out. It is extremely difficult to grapple with the fact that this exists in the same franchise as this, and this, and this, and this. None of this shit mixes well or makes sense next to each other, which is why there are so many different kinds of Star Wars fans out there and different ideas of what Star Wars is. There is no definitive version. It's why the franchise is simultaneously as popular as it is and as directionless as it is, because there is no direction. There is no core identity. Even Lucas himself had a different idea of what Star Wars was between his two trilogies and is incredibly inconsistent with lore and all kinds of stuff like that, and that was just one guy. So can Star Wars for adults work? Well, yes, in the sense that anything in this franchise can, but no, in the sense that nothing in this franchise can. This is an IP that doesn't just not deserve Andor, but at this point, doesn't deserve any content that's as good as this is. It's so far gone now that the good stuff will forever get buried in the mountain of insanity that is the constant Star Wars discourse. But for someone like me that has been a Star Wars fan for their entire life, and had pretty much given up on the franchise, I'm just happy that the show exists at all. It hasn't really been fun to be a Star Wars fan for a long time now. Between the constant toxic fan complaining and the endless stream of mediocrity coming from Disney, there was just nothing to enjoy about it. So for this show to come out and take a fucking defibrillator to myself and much of the Star Wars fan base is an absolute joy to be a part of. I've been watching a lot of the movies recently. I've been watching all the non-filler episodes of the Clone Wars while I edit this video. I played a bunch of Battlefront 2 last month for the first time in like 5 years. All of a sudden, it's fun to be a Star Wars fan again. Do I think it'll last and is a sign of good things to come? Well, no, not really. It's more like one last hurrah, one last great ride of Star Wars media for who knows how long, if ever. And it's all thanks to the Cassian Andor spin-off show. Who would have thought? So I, for one, am not going to waste it and ride this high for as long as it takes me, because it's probably never going to happen again.
Tonight, finally feeling free and it feels so right. Oh, time to do the things I like. Gonna see a princess, everything's alright. Oh.